Okay, so this is Jewish ethics, no homework, and we will begin by reviewing what we started on Tuesday, which is the Mishnah in Avos that says "Dam Ashatashi apikores." I'm going to review it really quickly because we have a lot to cover today, and I hope we get through all of it, but we'll see. So Rabbi Elazar Omer hevi shakud lilmod Torah, so you should be shakud to learn Torah, which we didn't exactly translate. Kadesh teda mashatashi apikores, so you know what to respond to a heretic. Vidal ifnei miata amel, and know before whom you toil. Leah, I was thinking all week and laughing about your statement about the Walmart version of Dal Ifnei Miata Omed. I don't know why I find that so funny, but I found it very funny. And you should know that your employer, meaning God, is trustworthy to pay you the wages of your work. So we're focusing on the first half, but we asked questions about the whole thing. Oh, sorry. Then we saw one Gemara before I list our questions. The Gemara made an important distinction. It quotes the Mishnah, a slightly different version. Havi shakud lilmod Torah v'dam mashatashiv apikores. You should be shakud to learn Torah and know what to respond to a heretic. Rabbi Yochanan lo shanu ella apikores nachri. This is only about a non-Jewish heretic, meaning you should respond to a non-Jewish heretic. Apikores Yisrael, but a Jewish heretic, kol shekain depakar tefeh, he will certainly become even more heretical, which means you should not respond to him. And we said that that's a little counterintuitive, is that you would think that we care more about responding to the Jew and not to the non-Jew, but it's the reverse. So our questions were, what's the definition of apikores in this context? The word apikores typically means anyone who denies the fundamental of Torah, but we know that it can be used in specific ways in different contexts. 2, what type of response is this talking about? Like, does it mean that you just know how to answer his questions, or does it mean that you actually have to be able to disprove him? What does it mean? 3, what's the relationship between the two halves of the Mishnah, if they're related at all? I do not think we're going to have time to answer that today. 4, how does learning Torah help you to respond to a heretic? Meaning, what kind of Torah learning are you going to do? I mentioned, learning detailed halachos is probably not what we're talking about here. 5, what does shakud mean? Does it mean quick, diligent, motivated, something else? 6, what does it mean trustworthy to pay you the wages of your work? What's know before whom you toil? Again, we're not going to really focus on that. Why should we respond to a heretic? That is one of the major questions. What's the purpose in responding to him? According to the Gemara, why should we respond only to a non-Jewish heretic? What does it mean that it says that responding to a Jewish heretic will make him more heretical? And then practically, how do we implement this today? Meaning, does this mean that we should just go out on the street and burst into churches and start, responding to their heresy? I mean, does it mean that only if we're publicly challenged? And then, sorry, I forgot to include the last question. Who is this for? Is this for everybody? Is just for the chassid, or is it one of those sliding scale things? So the step we made last time, we focused at the end on why respond at all, and we said there's 3 possibilities which have some subdivisions. One answer is you're responding for yourself, for your own sake, either to strengthen your own beliefs or to prevent yourself from internalizing the heresy. Like, you should know how to respond so that their heretical beliefs don't seep in. 2 is it's for society, is we don't want heretical beliefs being expressed in public because that's bad for Klal Yisrael, or it's bad for the non-Jews, depending on how you look at it. 3 is for the sake of the heretic. One possibility is to help him and try to change his mind. 2 is to demonstrate that we're not going to accept this and that we have answers to his questions. So that is that's another possibility. And then what we did is, once we saw the distinction between Jews and non-Jews, it sounds like we should rule this out, because if the purpose of knowing what to respond to a heretic is for your own sake, so then why does it matter where the heretical belief comes from? If a non-Jew denies Torah and a Jew denies Torah, I should still know how to respond for my own sake. So it seems to be that this Mishnah is referring to number 2 or number 3. So that is the end of our review. So before we do Mefarshin, anyone have any other thoughts or comments or questions about what we did before? All right, I'll take that as a no. Okay, so I don't know how many of you printed out the source sheet, but first one on the source sheet is Rashi. Okay, so here's what Rashi says, and again, just for the sake of expediency, because I do kind of want to finish this today, so we can start something new next week. I'll read and translate. So Shakud, he says, Mahir Vizaris, quick and diligent. What would you, just to make sure we have an understanding here, what's your definition of diligent or zrizus? Like, how would you explain zrizus or diligence?
Doing something well, but also fast.
Okay, good. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's doing it well and in an efficient way. So quick, I think, means like what do you, so if diligence has some idea of like fast, what do you think quick means here?
Not necessarily in the best way, but like fast. Like
Yeah, so the quickness here seems to be like the answer should be at your fingertips, you know? And then Zariz means efficient and done well and done energetically. So it's like maximum efficiency, like you should be just ready to go, you know? Okay, now this is where Rashi gives a specific answer here. Okay. So lahashiv lapikores haba lahavi raya min haTorah ledivre haminim, who comes to bring a proof from the Torah for the words of the heretics. Now, what is weird about this interpretation? Or to put it in a different way, what type of heretic does it seem like this is talking about according to Rashi? And the hint is it's not just any heretic who denies fundamental belief of Torah. This is a specific thing.
I mean, it sounds like it would be someone Jewish then.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be someone Jewish, right? Because what makes you say that?
Because the non-Jew, if you quote some words of Torah, they're either not going to know exactly what you're referencing, or like they can't verify whether you're saying the right thing.
Okay, that's definitely true. But anyone else have a different? I mean, I think Leah, you're right. But anyone else have a different way of characterizing what type of heretic does Rashi hold that this is talking about? Or give me an example of the type of heretic. Yeah.
I don't know what type, but like it separates him from other heretics because he's saying he's like backing up what other heretics say. He's not like coming up with ideas himself, maybe.
Okay, that's true, but where is he backing them? How is he backing them up?
With proof.
With what kind of proof?
Torah.
From the Torah. Okay, so we're talking about a heretic who is using Torah as a disproof of Torah. Okay, or using Torah as a proof for heresy. Okay, and like Leah said, that sounds like it would be a Jew who does this. Okay, but who do you think like? So let's be more specific here. Okay, what types of people, Jewish or non-Jewish, in today's society might do this? Give me examples of where you have encountered this or where you might encounter it.
I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like it would definitely be someone who's like really against the religion, because I feel like a normal heretic would just be someone who's like, oh, I don't believe, but like someone like this would be like, I don't believe, and I'm like going to show you specifically.
Okay, good. So one possibility is someone who has like an anti-Torah agenda, you know, like Eliana just said, like a person who just does not believe Torah is not going to go out of their way to try to like bring internal contradictions from Torah. They're just gonna not believe it, you know. So anyone have any like specific categories of people that come to mind?
Maybe someone who grew up with Judaism but then it doesn't agree, saying like they have the background of it, so they're able to like bring proof from it.
Okay, good. So I think number one candidate here is someone who grew up learning Torah, okay, for whatever circumstances, and therefore they're very familiar with it. And in fact, let's just read the rest of the Rashi to flesh it out a little bit more. So Rashi says, by the way, this is Rashi on the Gemara, which is differentiating between the Jew and the non-Jew. So for the Jew, it says, Koshkein de pakar tefe, certainly he will become even more heretical. Why? Shahari hikir vikafar, because he recognized the truth, meaning he formerly acknowledged the truth and then denied it. Umitoch kach, and because of this, midakdik. Okay, I know midakdik is a word that people use in everyday language sometimes. Also, how would you translate midakdik? What does it mean to be midakdik about something?
Particular, like
particular. Yeah. So here I'm going to translate it in an even more particular way. He'll be a stickler for detail. Okay. V'lo tuchal lahashivo davar hamakubalo, and you will not be able to respond to him with something that will be accepted by him. Okay, so like going with what we just said before. So let's say this is someone who grew up Jewish and is familiar with Torah, right? And then they end up denying Judaism. So they are going to be much more of a stickler for detail. And any answer that you give them, then they're going to try to to dodge or to bring counterproofs from, and therefore you're not going to be able to make any headway. Now, that's for a Jew. What would be an example, do you think, of non-Jews who would bring proofs from the Torah to support the words of heretics? And the hint is, think about like in Rashi's time or in the Gemara's time, who would be major the major threats that would be from outside of the Jewish people who would try to use Torah to disprove authentic Judaism? Christians, okay? And if you have ever, I don't know if you've ever seen videos from, okay, well, let me back up for 1 second. What groups of Christians nowadays will prey upon Jews and try to convert them to some form of Christianity? I don't know how familiar you are with these people.
Jews for Jesus?
Jews for Jesus, right? And I know there's a difference between Jews for Jesus and Messianic Jews. I always forget which one's which. One of them is like the general category and one of them is a specific movement. But movements like that, of people who are really Christians, but they will want to use Judaism to try to convert Jews to their version of Christianity. Or what would be another reason that Christians would have for trying to bring proofs from the Torah to support heretical beliefs? Like, let's say they're not trying to convert Jews. What else would they maybe be wanting to do?
Support atheism.
I'm talking about Christians specifically. We'll get to atheists in a second.
Support Jesus.
Yeah, is basically just to support their own beliefs and to try to prove that their religion is true and our religion is false. And this is something that is a real threat today. Like Christians still do this, you know. And again, it's because they hold that, without going into detail, you know, obviously they call their Bible the New Testament because they hold that the agreement that God made with the Jews was somehow broken or invalidated, and that God made a New Testament and that he sent, you know, Jesus, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they, in order to legitimize their religion, many of them feel compelled to delegitimize ours. Okay, so Christians, Jews for Jesus, and then Leah mentioned atheists, right? So atheists, I think, would be another example. Give me an example of like a type of argument that atheists will use that involves bringing proof from the Torah to support anti-Torah beliefs. Just give me an example of like a particular belief that you've seen atheists do this with.
Hashem creating the world and then leaving?
Yeah, right. Well, okay. They don't say Hashem created the world and left, because that would still be a deist, right? But that Hashem did not create the world, right? So creation is an area where they do this.
People say like,
yeah, go ahead.
I've heard people say like, oh, the Torah is so old, like the things that are written in it don't even make sense anymore. Okay,
right. So some of them will make cultural or societal based arguments by saying that the Torah is outdated, and they will bring, like, they say, oh, like, look how stupid this is, something that Elisheva requested as a topic. So I do plan on addressing this, but they'll say like, oh, how can the Torah be a document of justice if it supports slavery, you know, or if it, like, you know, is support,
has incorrect,
you know,
scientific things.
Say again?
If it has like incorrect things about science.
Yeah, right. Or if it has incorrect things about science, that's another example. I was going to ask, what topics have we talked about? So I mentioned the Mabul, right? Many people will point to the Mabul and say that, oh, this is clearly a false book, because how could there be a flood that flooded the entire world, you know? Or maybe some of the stuff that we dealt with last Friday seminar in archaeology, which is also going to be this Friday seminar, they'll try to bring archaeological evidence against Torah. So according to Rashi, this is not talking about all apikores. This is specifically dealing with an apikores who tries to use the Torah to disprove the Torah, or to disprove fundamental beliefs of Torah. And it's saying, if it's a Jew, so then they're going to know the ins and outs of Torah, and they're going to become even more of an apikores, because the more arguments you try to make, what's going to end up happening, well, in other words, why does this make him, I understand how he's going to be resistant to your beliefs, but why is this going to make him even more of an apikores?
Maybe because this is what he doesn't agree with. Are you saying like if you bring back from,
I can't hear all of your words. Say it again.
Like if you bring back proofs from the Torah,
yeah,
then he would, like, that's the thing that he doesn't agree with from the first place. Like he knows it well and he doesn't agree with it.
Okay, so number one, the non-Jew doesn't have the same type of bias because he is not reacting to Torah. But like Ayala is saying, the Jew has a bias. He whether it's an intellectual or an emotional bias, he has already recognized the Torah and then rejected it. So you're already like going uphill here. You're barking up the wrong tree. But then how does the fact that he's a stickler for detail, how's that going to strengthen his apikores?
Because he's going to know what to look for in your argument that like kind of doesn't have an answer in Judaism.
And then what is that going to do to his own beliefs?
Further how much he thinks they're true.
Exactly. In other words, like this, every argument you give him, so he's going to be medactic, and then he's going to think that he defeated you. So every argument you make to defend Torah, he in his mind will convert it to an argument that says he's right and you're wrong. So the more ammunition you give him, then the more he's going to become entrenched in his belief. So in other words, he's already walking in with a bias. He's not like a neutral person. And since he knows how to be medactic with your arguments, then every argument that you give him, he's going to flip around to be a support for himself. Whereas the non-Jew who doesn't know Torah doesn't necessarily have that bias. You know, they might have a bias like from their own belief system, but they're not going to have an anti-Torah bias necessarily in the same way that this guy does. And they're not going to know how to be medactic and to like try to, and they're not going to be able to, like, let's say you bring a proof. Let's say, for example, just imagine this dialogue, right? So like, and I've had tons of conversations like this. Let's say you have a Christian who brings a challenge from a pasuk, okay? And then you just quote the Gemara and say, well, this is not how we interpret the pasuk. Like the Gemara says that you know, ayin tachas ayin is not literal. Okay, what's the Christian going to do? He's going to be like, okay, I can't argue with that. You know, like you know. But the Jew will say, oh, well, like that's not what the Gemara means. Like there's another Gemara here that says this, or like there's an obscure Rishon who says that, or like you know, he's going to know how to like maneuver around stuff, and so it's going to like end up putting check marks in his side of the tally. Okay, so this is Rashi. Ayala.
Like that's just saying that if you argue with someone who's knowledgeable on it, it'll be like a more nuanced argument, right? But like
yes.
at the same, so it will give him more ammunition originally, but you're not like you're trying. I guess you already know the truth, but like you're just gonna be talking with him about trying to find the truth. So like eventually you will get there, even though like along the way we'll be giving you more ammunition. Eventually you should get there if you're like.
Yeah. So if you're so I think tell me if this is what you're saying, Ayala, that if his arguments really are not good, and if your arguments really are good, then the fact that he's medactic is not going to disprove the truth. In other words, if your arguments are good enough, you should be able to ultimately refute him, you know, and like win. So you're in an ideal world, you're correct. And if you were interested in the truth, then you'd be correct. But it sounds like Rashi is going with the premise that there is some sort of intellectual dishonesty here, that he knows what's true and he's deflecting it with bad arguments that masquerade as nuanced arguments. You know, so if you're right, if he actually were making real arguments and were intellectually honest and open, then he might not become more heretical and you might actually win him back. But I think Rashi is my understanding of this Rashi is it sounds like this guy has like a bias and he's going to like maneuver out of your arguments no matter what.
And you're saying that this would not be the case for the Christian or someone who doesn't have a background in Torah because they won't be able to make nuanced arguments.
Okay,
so the arguments that they make will just be obviously dumb. Okay,
so the answer is yes and no. Okay, yes in the sense that this is how Rashi is interpreting the Gemara's distinction between a non-Jew and a Jew. But here's the thing: based on Rashi's explanation, I think that the category of Jew can be expanded to anyone who is capable of making a nuanced argument based on being medactic. So for example, let's say you have a Christian who studies Jewish sources, you know, I think that this would apply to that also, or an atheist who studies Jewish sources. And conversely, let's say you have a Jew whose knowledge of Torah is so superficial that he is like a Christian and he will not be able to make nuanced arguments. I think that Jew would be in the category of what the Gemara calls a non-Jew. So in other words, when Rashi says non-Jew and Jew, he just means like the general case. But I think what he really means is someone who is able to be medactic and has a bias versus someone who is not able to be medactic and doesn't have that same bias. Yeah. And this, for this reason, I'll just give you practical advice here is, and I've been given this advice by, I think I first heard this from, there's a famous rabbi named Rabbi Tovia Singer. Maybe I'll send you guys a video, who is he's a counter missionary. So he's a Jewish rabbi, Orthodox, who basically his whole like career as a teacher is disproving Jews for Jesus missionaries. And he's really good at it. So one of the things he says, one of the pieces of advice he gives is you should not engage with Christians about proofs from the Bible. And the reason why is because they know the Bible better than you do. Okay. Like these people who are trying to convert people. So if you quote, if you quote them a pasuk in Yeshayahu, they'll be able to twist it around and make it seem like Yeshayahu is supporting Jesus, you know? So like, unless you really know what you're doing, then probably best not to get into arguments with them, you know? And I would make the same arguments for like, you know, let's say like conservative and reform or secular Jewish academics, like professors and stuff. Like, don't get into arguments with them unless you know what you're doing, unless you could really really disprove them and counter their being medactic, because they're very good at what they do. So, you know, yeah. Okay, so this I think really, so again, just in the interest of time, let me just go through the quickly. So he's defining apikores as someone who's bringing proofs from Torah against fundamental Torah beliefs. What type of response is this? So it's a response where you presumably are interpreting the Torah correctly to refute what they say. We'll skip 3 and skip 3. Okay. 4 is how does learning Torah help you? So what type of Torah learning? So this means so what type of Torah learning do you think that this Mishnah is telling you to do according to Rashi? Like if you want to sit down and prepare for this type of response, what should you focus on?
Words of Torah that support Torah.
Okay, words of Torah that support Torah, that's definitely true. But like if you're in head-to-head combat with these guys and they're bringing proofs from Torah, you know, let's say from specific psukim and gemaras, what should you focus on in order to counteract that?
I mean, maybe like the interpretations of those gemaras and things, and
Yeah.
also different psukim and gemaras.
Exactly. You should focus on the things that they are going to use as disproofs of Torah, those specific things, and you should learn why their interpretations are wrong and what the correct interpretations are. And I'll give you an example of this, is that there is this is like an example of something that's just, you know, a superficial argument, is that I don't remember where it is, but I know that there's a proof that Christians try to bring from Yeshayahu to prove that Mashiach will be born to a virgin. Okay. And they bring a proof from the Hebrew, and the Hebrew actually doesn't mean virgin, it means young maiden. Okay. But they bring it as a proof, you know, like, because they don't know Hebrew, you know? So like, you should learn that correct thing. Or another example of this is like, there are, let's say, midrashin, you know, like this happened to the Ramban in the disputation, is that like, you know, the Pablo Christiani quoted a midrash that said that Mashiach will be born when the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and Pablo Christiani says, oh, so you see that when the Beis Hamikdash, you know, was being destroyed, then Jesus was born. And Ramban said, yeah, I don't buy that midrash, you know. And so like you know, learning these principles to be able to take the specific proofs that they're going to use and then show how they're not really you know, how they're not really true. Okay. 5, what does shakud mean? Shakud just, I think, means fluent. That you should know how to respond very quickly and accurately. 6 and 7 we're not going to answer. 8, why should we respond? According to Rashi, Rashi doesn't really take a stance on that, you know. So I think whatever we said last time could be true. Number 9, we answered why only a non-Jew. And 10, practically how do we implement this today, is only go into this if you know what you're doing. Okay. All right. Any other questions on Rashi? If not, we'll go on to the Rambam. Okay. Rambam is the most difficult of the ones that I found. Okay. So I'm going to read it. We'll try to think about it, but like, I don't know if I have answers. Okay. Rambam says like this, be shakud to learn Torah to know what to respond to a heretic. Amar lamed devarim, you should learn things. Shebehem tashiv lekofrim min ha'umos, v'tis vakeach itam v'tana lehem im yishalucha. Learn things through which you can respond to those heretics from the non-Jews and argue with them and respond to them if they ask you. V'amru lo shanu ela apikores goy, ava apikores Yisrael koshkein de pakar. And this was they said this is only taught in reference to a non-Jewish heretic, but a Jewish heretic will be more heretical. So kolomar, this means shehu mosif zilzul ubizui, he will increase his disrespect and degradation. Okay, so this is not like Rashi. Rashi's saying, why shouldn't you respond to a Jew? Because the Jew will know how to weasel his way out of your arguments. Rambam is saying, if you respond to a Jew, it's going to make him degrade and disrespect and mock Torah even more. And you have probably had enough exposure to the world to see this, is that the people who mock Torah the most tend to be secular Jews or anti-religious Jews, or Jews who like went off the derech, or Jews who like rejected, orthodoxy, not the non-Jews. Non-Jews these days are not very into mocking Torah unless they're into mocking religion in general, But so the Rambam is worried about, so according to the Rambam, like so far, what does it seem like, what does it seem like his answer is to the question of why should we respond? Like what does it seem like the Rambam's concerned with here?
To resolve it, maybe?
So I think the part about the non-Jews sounds like resolving it, right? Like the arguing with them and responding to them if they ask you. But I think the fact that we're worried about degrading Torah sounds to me like we're trying to defend the reputation of Torah. So if our efforts to respond to this Jew is going to make him mock Torah even more, so then that's why we don't do it. Okay. But maybe Ayala is correct because of what the Rambam says now. Okay. And this is the part that I cannot explain. Okay. He says, Lefikach ein roy lihisvakeach imo klal. Therefore, it's not proper to argue with him at all. Lefisha eno misached, because he cannot be mended. He can't be repaired. Ve'en lo refuah klal, and there's no healing for him. And then he quotes pasuk in Mishlei, which is about, Rambam learns that Mishlei is about apikores. Okay, not like we learn it about everyday decisions. Kol ba'eha lo yeshuvin v'lo yasigu orchos chaim. All of those who come to her, all of those who go to heresy, will not return, and they will not grasp the paths of life. So it sounds like what the Rambam is saying, why should we not respond? So he's giving two reasons why we shouldn't respond to a Jew. Number one is he'll only insult Torah more. But then what's the other reason why we shouldn't respond to a Jew?
There's no coming back.
There's no coming back. Now, do you guys have a problem with this the same way I do? I know I'm kind of prejudicing you, but does anyone find that disturbing? Yeah, why?
Because there's such a thing as tshuva.
Yeah, there's such a thing as tshuva, right? So like, I don't think the Rambam would say it's impossible for him to come back, and if it is possible for him to come back, so then why don't we try? Like, you never know whether a person will come back, and there have been famous, apikoresim who have come back, either people who started off as apikoresim or people who became apikoresim and then came back, So like, I have tremendous difficulty with the Rambam here. I think there is a simple explanation, which is not that the Rambam is saying that guarantee there's no way to cure him, but I think what the Rambam is saying is like this, is since the more you argue against the Jewish apikores, the more he's going to degrade Torah, and since it's unlikely for him to do tshuva, so then it's too much of a risk for you to try to argue with him, because he's just going to end up digging in his heels, and it's unlikely that he's going to come back. But maybe the Rambam is allowing for exceptions. He's just giving you a general rule. I find it so hard to believe that it's impossible to come back, according to the Rambam, because Rambam, wrote the book on free will. So, like, he obviously holds that it is possible to do tshuva. Yeah, Ayala? Were you going to say something? I saw your unmuting.
Yeah, could it be that he's saying that it's impossible to come back from you arguing with him, but like he has to, if someone's going to come back, they have to do it on their own, and like you just getting like,
oh, that's interesting.
Show them the truth by arguing with them.
That is interesting. That's very, very interesting. In fact, I just saw an article from the New York Times yesterday about arguing with conspiracy theorists. And this person was saying how, like, he spent, I forget if it was a he or she, that they spent the whole first part of their life like arguing with conspiracy theorists. And then finally they realized that the only thing you could really do, you can't really argue with them, but what you can do is you can prompt them to think more about their own reasons for accepting something. and maybe get them to realize that there are, on their own, that there are gaps and holes and inconsistencies in their thinking, and then that could open them up to ideas. So that's possible. That's a good argument, meaning you can't fix him. I didn't think about that originally, because it sounds like when he says ein lo refuah, sounds like there is no healing, meaning even for himself. But I agree in principle with what you're saying, Ayala. Okay, let's do one more, and then I think that'll be enough for now, unless I find something over Shabbos. So the Meiri is the last one. Havi shaku lilmod Torah, kolomar. Now he gives a different definition of shaku. Havi masmit lilmod Torah. Be someone who is continually learning Torah. Okay, so he's using shakud as continuous, not quick or diligent. Mashitashi apikores, kolomar. So this means to say, nosaf al mashitzarech lacha ba. In addition to what is necessary for you in it, meaning in addition to the explanation of the mitzvos and in the Talmud, you need to learn the philosophical things, or the ancient word for philosophical is speculative, okay, meaning the non-halachic areas. Ma shetashiv esa apikores, what to respond to a heretic, hacholik ala Torah, who argues with Torah, b'mofsim kozvim, using false proofs, obilti chodchim, or proofs which are not definitive, meaning proofs that are not like ironclad, proofs that are not absolute. Ad sheteda lahachziv mofsav, until you learn how to falsify his proofs. Bamesh yavo laharos bahem minapinos hatorios, which he uses to break down the foundations of Torah. V'chein sheteda la'ames lo mofsim chodchim. Likewise, you should know how to verify for him with definitive proofs. Imba laharher bepinos hamuskalos. If he comes to criticize the foundations that could be known through reason. Okay, so let's break this down, because there's a lot here. Okay, first of all, what is he saying you're going to need to learn? Like, what's the havamina and what's the maskana? What would you think that you should be focusing on, and what is this telling you that you should focus on in addition?
Instead of just learning like the texts and the like Hamisha Torah or like books of Tanakh, you also have to learn like the philosophical ideas and proofs for it, and like extra philosophical
Exactly. Stuff. Okay, good. And I'll repeat that. I'll repeat that now. Just is that that not just learning halacha and the standard like curriculum of like Torah B'Ksam, Torah B'Peh. You need to learn the types of philosophical arguments that will allow you to respond to the heretic who challenges the foundations of Torah. So this would be like, like Leah's teacher that you mentioned about apikores being evolution, and like Ayala's dad who came in and gave like a did he do this in 9th grade with you guys with the evolution presentation, right? So he came in and taught, what does the Torah actually hold about evolution? Or let's say with this year when Rabbi Fader came in and talked about the God versus the multiverse and how to address, those things. So you're going beyond the standard curriculum and learning specifically things in philosophy. And I think he would include here science. Back then, science was not a thing. It was just all philosophy, but scientific things also to be able to disprove that. Because, or like what we're doing in, like what we did in, I think the Mabul thing also applies to that, or in the archaeology thing, anything that is going to be able to respond to the apikores who challenges Torah on the basis of philosophy and science. Okay. Secondly, he says that not only do you need to learn the contents, but you also need to learn how to falsify his proofs, okay, which is going to either be learned through the content of Torah, or what have you learned in English class that might allow you to falsify his proofs? Rhetoric, that's one. And then what do we do as part of our daily routine? Fallacies, right? So learning rhetoric, meaning how is he using rhetoric to manipulate the truth, or what fallacies is he committing, or what we're going to do after fallacies, by the way, this is a sneak peek for what we're going to do next week. So we've done 24 fallacies. We're going to now switch to cognitive biases, which Elisheva probably learned in psychology, I feel like. I don't know if that's true, but or maybe some more of you have also. So you should be able to figure out whether he's using fallacious arguments or biased arguments, and then you should also know the contents of Torah to be able to disprove them. And you should also know how to verify for him with definitive proofs if he comes to criticize the foundations that can be known through reason. So what this means is, certain fundamental beliefs in Torah we only know through Nevuah. For example, there's no way to prove Mashiach except through Nevuah. So if he doesn't accept Nevuah, you're not going to be able to prove Mashiach. However, what are things that are fundamentals of Torah that can be proven through reason?
Sinai.
Torah Sinai, right? So Torah Sinai is one that you can prove through reason. What's another thing that either can or that has, that's possible to prove, people think it's possible to prove through reason? God, right? So there are lots of different arguments for philosophical proofs of God, So other things that cannot be proven through reason is hashgacha pratis, reward and punishment, tchias hamesim. So in other words, of the fundamentals of Judaism, you should know which ones can be proven through reason, and those you should try to be able to learn all the proofs for. And then the things that can't be proven through reason, then there's nothing that you could really do to convince someone who's only relying on reason. Okay, so that is the Meiri's take on this. And I think that answers our questions here. So he's not addressing the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew, by the way. I could not find, maybe I missed it actually, now I'm thinking about it. Because I didn't look at the Gemara there, but he doesn't explain the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew. So are there any questions on what we've done or practical questions about this Damash Tashiv apikores? Because that's what I intended to cover for this week.
Yeah, would you say this is just for a chassid or someone going out to the world, or like everyone like me?
Good question. So I would give two answers. One answer is in terms of capability, the other is in terms of responsibility. So in terms of capability, definitely this is a sliding scale that in those areas where you're capable of this, then you should respond to an apikores. But if you're not capable, then don't respond, because number one, you might not do a good job for them, and number two is you might actually dig yourself in deeper to the apikores' beliefs. Better to just like walk away. In terms of responsibility, I think that that's also a sliding scale, which is that if a person is a community leader or a teacher in a public position, then they really do have a responsibility to learn how to do this, especially in this day and age when these types of challenges are very, very, very common and much more public, especially because of things like the internet and stuff like that. But if you are not in a public position, then I wouldn't say that you have that same level of responsibility. Like I'd say prioritize yourself, or maybe again, if you're capable and there are people around you who will be influenced by this discussion, maybe you should do it. But I'd say that of the categories of the Mishnayos, this is a sliding scale one, that it's not absolutely only for Hasidim. It could also be for average individuals, but only average individuals who are qualified. And that applies to you guys also. And you should know yourself and know your own limits and know your own strengths and weaknesses. Alrighty. So I think that's good for today. And I will compile the English packet of the daily ritual things and post that sometime early this afternoon. Okay. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow for Lomdeha seminar. See ya.
Thank you.